Welcome to a very special edition of The Piano Men with Stanley Carr on W. I am pleased to welcome singer-songwriter Ariel Bui to the show tonight. Bui graduated from Rollins College in 2009, where she majored in music. After moving to Nashville, she currently owns and runs the Melodia Studio, one of the area's top music schools. Composing on both piano and guitar, Bui works with acclaimed producer Andrea Tokic, right?
Andrea, and my last name's Bui.
Oh, Bui.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Bui. All right. And they currently are a part of the up-and-coming indie rock scene. Ariel, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Stanley. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's all mine. Trust me. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Ariel, tell me about your upbringing. Where did you grow up?
Oh my gosh, I grew up all over the States. I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana. I lived in the burbs of Dallas, Texas for a little while. Grew up in Florida for quite a while, in Central Florida, and New York, California, New Mexico, and Nashville the last 10 years.
Oh, man. You've been all over the country.
I've been all over the country, yeah.
Seen so many things, listened to all kinds of music, I bet.
Absolutely.
And just taking it all in, just getting the best of the best. So you're talking about you grew up all over the country. What made you want to decide to pursue music, and how did you get into music?
You know, I think it always kind of came somewhat naturally to me. So I think it was part nature, but I think it was part nurture too. I have a family who loves music. My parents listened to a lot of music, and my dad played guitar. We always had a piano in the house, but also my extended family all really loved music, and I had cousins who studied piano and cello and all of these other things, karaoke parties and all of that. So whether it was my grandparents loving music, my aunts and uncles, my parents, they all appreciate and listen to music. But I think, some of us kind of stuck with it more than others. And it was just something that I always wanted to do. I think when I was a kid, I would sing a lot. And then I think at some point I started teaching myself piano after a couple of keyboard classes in preschool, And I've sang in choirs all throughout elementary and middle school, joined the middle school band and did percussion. By the time I got to high school, I'd started writing songs on the guitar and teaching myself to play, and writing and recording and performing on guitar, and was recruited as a piano major in college. So it just kind of evolved that way. I've always just loved it.
Just kind of zigzagged around.
Yeah, different instruments and just different types of music, different styles of music, and so I love the challenge. And it just makes me feel good.
Music definitely should make you feel good. It's art. It's something that you should be inspired by, and something that you can take away as food for thought. And it's just good for the soul.
Yeah, and it's a nice puzzle, It's a puzzle which helps me with my mindfulness when I'm doing it. I think I've gotten older, I've gotten a little more jaded, but back when I was younger too, I felt I had a very challenging and difficult childhood. And so music was often my way of coping with life's challenges. You get to express yourself, you get to spend time with yourself, and you get to focus on one singular activity, the way that for me, I feel like music is meditation. So that helped me a lot then. Now that life is a little less traumatizing than it was when I was younger. I mean, there's still things to cope with, but I'm trying to find a new way to evolve into music not only being a coping mechanism for difficulties, but perhaps how do I evolve into utilizing music as a way to express joy?
Definitely. I mean, a song should definitely make you happy. I mean, there are times where it can be a little sad, but definitely there's no better feeling in the world than to jam out to your favorite song or play something that makes you feel inspired.
Absolutely.
So, who were some of you like your favorite artists growing up? Who were some of like your earliest influences as far as being a musician?
Oh wow, that's a good question. Well, we grew up in a Beatles household, so there was a lot of the Beatles going on. And I've always loved them. Even if I don't listen to them a lot now, it's kind of one of those foundational bands.
Mm-hmm.
They are great songwriters, they are great musicians, and they were the biggest pop stars, of their time. Um, and I would say when I started playing guitar, Andres Segovia was a big
Mm.
influence on me. His classical guitar playing, uh, I guess, you know, I would definitely say that my parents' record collection from the 60s and 70s were one of my first big influences, whether it was Simon and Garfunkel or Bob Dylan or, those classic songwriters. But then, I would say getting older and like middle school, high school, listening to my own bands, rock and roll. I loved, I mean, it's funny. I'm thinking about middle school and like maybe I shouldn't say some of those bands out loud, but just so many from local bands to larger bands. A lot of rock music, I guess.
You were inspired by the classics.
The classics first, yes, but then the classics of our day and age. A lot of indie rock and gosh, I can't even begin to list them all. There's so
Yeah.
many, from strange bands like Deerhoof or Blonde Redhead or
Mm-hmm.
Fiona Apple, Regina Spektor, Radiohead,
Mm-hmm.
Bjork. Those are some of the more contemporary artists that I love.
Very eclectic mix.
Yes.
Yes. So it seems like you had a lot of music growing up in the household.
Yes, always listening to music.
Were your parents songwriters? Did they try to dabble in it?
My mom was more of a writer and
Sure.
poet and a visual artist. My dad did dabble in songwriting and writing poetry. But actually for a long time, I thought, I honestly didn't know how I felt about his songwriting. And so I honestly feel like I took whatever critiques that I had of his style, and incorporated some of those things into my own, or not into my own, really. Yeah, so a little bit, not professionally, but it was always around in the house.
Nice. So do you remember like going back to your influences? You mentioned a lot of eclectic artists that you liked, like Beatles and some of the more '90s grunge bands of the time. What can you tell me? Do you remember some of the first records that you bought growing up?
My very first CD that I bought, like that I got to pick out for myself, was TLC's "Crazy Sexy Cool."
Oh,
I loved the R&B of the 90s and the early 2000s. I would say, even though I listened to a lot of rock music, a lot of the singing that I would, I love to sing. And the R&B singers of the 90s, and the early 2000s were amazing. So like TLC, I had listened to them, but then eventually it was Destiny's Child and Beyonce, or I mean, there are just so many to
mm-hmm.
name. Brandy, Monica, all of them.
Yeah,
Just a lot of different singers to sing along to.
yeah,
Christina Aguilera, all these pop stars,
yeah.
So I was
Britney.
really into that. Yeah. I don't know if I was really into singing along like Britney. She's got a more, like a raspier thing that
Mm-hmm.
raspier
Yeah,
thing that she does with her voice. But yeah, that was my first CD that I bought for
nice.
myself. And I think in 7th grade, and my other favorite record that I picked out was Fiona Apple's "When the Pawn." So
Oh,
that was a huge influence
mm-hmm.
on me, as a songwriter, a lyricist, understanding what production was and all of that. So
Mm-hmm.
those were a couple of my favorite records.
Very cool. What can you tell me about some of the first gigs you played?
Well, I started playing my first gig ever. I was 15. It was at some tiny little recording studio that didn't last long. at that point when I started playing and performing, I was living in the Brevard County, Florida. It's like Cocoa Beach is over there. So I was in Melbourne, Florida. So it was this little space in Melbourne. I remember usually most of the bands were like punk bands or hardcore bands. And so I remember booking my first show, being really nervous. I remember my dad was there with a camcorder. I remember some of my friends from high school came. And it was, I remember it very distinctly. And after that, it was a lot of playing in my solo acoustic guitar sets amongst, rock bands and noise bands and hardcore bands and stuff like that. I used to play a lot of shows, and I guess that was 21 years ago. So
Wow.
Been a lot of shows since then.
Were you nervous?
I was very nervous. Yeah, I remember not being used to being in front of a microphone and saying to, everybody who was like sitting along the floor, they were all sitting on the floor, saying, oh, I'm not used to speaking into a microphone. And I remember I was so nervous. And one of the people that was there, they said, well, then don't talk into the microphone. And I was so nervous already. I think I held a grudge against her for a long time just for that. I was so nervous, and she kind of heckled me.
Oh, that's crazy.
But it's okay. Actually, now that it's been a whole pandemic, I feel a little bit strange in front of a microphone sometimes, to go back to performing live after a couple of years of taking a major break. I'm actually really nervous to start playing shows again, but it's okay. Hopefully it's like riding a bike, and I've done it a lot.
It's crazy how the last couple of years has kind of made us sort of forget what we were doing, kind of like the way we would do certain things, and now we have to reprogram our brain to get back on track. So it's a process, and I think we're on the right path. Everybody's gotten their shots and whatnot, and hopefully we can kind of return to a time when people would go out to shows and go to concerts.
Yeah, I'm really nervous to kind of like re-enter that world. I've luckily, knock on wood, been able to avoid getting COVID so far. But a lot of people I know have, in different varying degrees. Sure. But for sure, yeah, I miss the whole, like, the house, from anywhere from the house shows to the venue shows to just hitting the road. And I got a couple of shows coming up, and I hope I don't get COVID and have to cancel either of them. I've had to miss a couple of shows because of the artists getting COVID. So I hope my show will go on.
I hope so too. That's very worrisome whenever that can happen.
Yeah.
Who do you consider starting out, Ariel, who you consider to be some of the most important mentors in your career?
Mentors in my career, in my music career? Well, absolutely the people at Rollins College, my professors at Rollins College, my piano professor, Dr. Gloria Cook, my composition professor, Dr. Daniel Crozier. I wasn't planning on becoming a music major, but they recruited me from my Music Theory 101 class that I decided to sign up for, and said, oh, you have natural technique, you should sign up. They were really instrumental in teaching me the discipline of music, because even though I was doing it independently before, I think that I didn't necessarily have any mentors other than, my fellow bands, the other musicians, my fellow musicians, kind of, all doing that together as a community. But I would definitely say that my music school professors were some of my first mentors. Also, all of my music teachers in public schools. I I said earlier, I lived in so many different places, but it was those music teachers in those schools, even when I didn't have any stability in the rest of my life, who were like, here's your own recorder. You're a natural at music. Here, you can have this. This is yours, or really the music teachers all throughout my childhood.
That's just unbelievable. That's amazing, to have all those people in your corner that have supported you, and look where you are now, And right now we're going to try to play a selection here that you sent me. This is the Midnight Waltz in C. What can you tell me about this piece?
So, I don't often write on piano. Actually, this is the only thing I've ever written on piano. I composed it while I was in college studying music. I don't even remember if it was an assignment to compose this, but this was a live performance of me performing at the composition recital while I was at Rollins College, probably in 2008 or so, and it's inspired somewhat by, we had to pick something that inspired it. So at the time it was The Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind, John Bryan's composition for that. It was a little bit inspired by that. And, listening back at it, I wish we had a more professional recording of it, but it was such a privilege to be able to perform in an acoustic hall on a Steinway grand piano, a concert grand. So that's mostly what I can say about Midnight Waltz in C.
All right, we're going to try to play Midnight Waltz in C, and hopefully this will work. You're listening to The Piano Men with Stan. Terrific. That was terrific.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm chatting with Ariel Bui tonight. She's a singer-songwriter here in Nashville. And so you attended Rollins College in Florida. You talked a little bit about that earlier. And you majored in music while you were attending Rollins College. What can you tell me about your time there, and do you have any fond memories that you care to share?
Well, I remember I chose Rollins College because it was a small private college. It's outside of Orlando. It's in Winter Park, Florida. And I had already been living in Florida. I was going to Cocoa Beach High School before that. And I received scholarships to attend. And I really loved that the campus was really beautiful and that the faculty to student ratio was really small. And I had initially intended to study something that would lead me to study law. So I was planning on going to law school afterwards. But then I realized you actually can study anything in your undergraduate for your undergraduate degree before going to grad school for law. And I had thought sociology, but it was so depressing that I decided against that. And, your freshman year, usually you pick a bunch of different kinds of classes so you can decide what you want to major in. And I just have always loved music. So I signed up for a music theory 101 class. And as I mentioned earlier, we were in the practicum, the music theory, that we had like the theory, then the practicum. So the practicum was kind of like this keyboard theory class where we had keyboards and headphones and computers. And I was kind of bored at one point, and was playing this Bach minuet in G to myself. Yeah. And the teacher could hear it through the headphones. And she was like, "Who's doing that?" I felt like I got caught doodling or something, and
noodling
exactly. And she said, "You should declare a music major so that I can teach you and it'll be a part of your tuition, and if you change your mind you can do that." And I never changed paths because I loved studying anywhere from playing music and playing piano to singing in choir to music history, music theory, music composition, all of that. I soaked it up. It was really difficult. There were times, where I felt really frustrated because it was a lot of discipline and a lot of work. And then at the same time at Rollins, I got involved in WPRK college radio. So I also found a passion for not just music there, but also for community radio there, and was the promotions director and a DJ, and also the station manager at certain points, and put on large events. And so it was a really nice way to be a part of the Orlando music community.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you got your name out there and network with so many people. I mean, when you get that kind of publicity, you're now in the circle of musicians and radio people, radio personalities, and DJs, and so you are now making so much headway and momentum, and you've definitely played a lot of shows during your time in Rollins. And why don't you tell me about some of the fun gigs that you played during your time at Rollins?
Recently, I went down to Orlando. It was for a sad thing. It was for I was also involved in Orlando Food Not Bombs. It was an doing activism, sharing food with people. We would cook meals and share them in the parks for the homeless and
nice.
and anyone else who was hungry. And we recently had a friend, Eric Montanez, pass away. But we were at Uncle Lou's, which is this kind of dive bar, and Uncle Lou opened his bar up for us to celebrate Eric's life, but it reminded me of all of the fun shows that I played at Uncle Lou's. There were a lot of other cool venues too. The Black Box Collective. I did my very first album release there. It was like, just punk spaces, really. But yeah, recently going back to Uncle Lou's was really like a nice memory because I have fond memories of playing, my acoustic covers and originals in between people rolling around doing like interesting dance routines in leotards to like crazy noise. Or, there was this one, I forget what she performed as, but she would like she would scream the words along to silent films that have the words at the bottom or like in between the scenes and things like that. So those were some of my favorite shows. Some of my favorite shows are house shows that I've played. Will's Pub, I've played there, and just a lot of cool venues around Florida. But also sometimes the seedier the better. American Legion halls, where the hardcore bands would like throw the crackers on the floor and everybody'd be sliding around on cracker crumbs and stuff. So lots of fun.
You get a lot of crazy people attending those shows.
Yeah,
do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, light their cymbals on fire and stuff. It was a lot of fun.
Wow. So we just, as we're talking here, you're telling me about a lot of the music you've listened to growing up and a lot of the music that you've played. Out of all the genres of music that you've played in your career so far, what's your favorite to play?
I think it really depends, but I was thinking about that time and yeah, sure, it was fun to play these DIY shows and stuff, but, during that time specifically, I started singing in the Bach Festival choir, and, we sang, I was a soprano too, apparently. Normally I sing very alto, but when I started taking voice lessons at the end of my time at Rollins, we sang Carmina Burana, and I was singing that as, a soprano too, in this acoustic cathedral with a whole orchestra, and it was probably my favorite. I remember just how my body felt, when you're really singing operatically like that, your body becomes your resonance chamber in a way that it doesn't when you're doing other just more casual singing styles. And so I don't know if I have a favorite, but definitely there are certain moments like that you can't just have any day, every day, definitely like singing in 100-person choir with an orchestra and a conductor and all of that.
That's just something, you can't reproduce, and it's not easy to sing something or perform something like opera, because that takes a lot of skill.
It takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of practice. It takes, having a teacher and a trainer and all of that. And I would love to be able, there's something, I feel like a lot of music majors who leave school have these feelings of wishing that there was something in the rest of life that, because it's like either you become a classical musician in that world that is so competitive. It's like it requires you to be 100% in. You can't have interests outside of that. You have to go full on, or you go out into the real world and you have to try to find a space where you can even make that kind of music for fun. So, yeah, I definitely miss those days.
Yeah. So segueing kind of into that, you seem to have gained a lot of knowledge and you've played all sorts of shows. Can you tell me the difference or differences you've noticed when playing classical music versus dabbling in something like pop music or rock music?
I feel like my time in pop and rock music is a lot more vast and a lot longer than the time I spent in classical music. Classical music, I was dedicated doing that for 4 years mostly, those years that I was in college. Outside of that, it's been mostly, pop and rock. And your question was like, what have I found has been the difference? Some of the main differences?
Yeah.
Well, I think that the classical world is very rigid in a lot of ways. There's a lot of etiquette, whether it's when you bow or when you clap or what you wear. Whereas in pop and rock, I think that those kinds of things are different. I think that in the world of pop and rock, you have so many different styles of music. You get cliques, you get like you get different groups of people, and I wish that in that world of pop and rock that there was a little bit more unity throughout the genres. Pop and rock is really wide ranging. I mean, there's so many kinds of rock and there's so many kinds of, and when we're using the word pop, we're talking about not classical really. So that's like everything. So I found that in the world of pop and rock, you have like so many different genres or micro genres of it that it's really split up. I don't know if that's like even a comparison. It's like comparing apples and oranges. But I think, the classical world can be very much more formal, very much more rigid. And the world of pop and rock, well, that's so vast that it's hard to even pinpoint how to describe it.
It's like with classical music, you have to kind of, it's more of a serious tone versus pop and rock is just more casual.
Yeah, absolutely. In general, pop and rock are way more casual, and classical music is, generally much more formal.
We're going to segue to this next selection. This is called How It Should Be. Ariel, can you tell me about this selection?
So this is off of, well, I originally wrote this song when I was in high school, possibly in college, but, so probably somewhere in the early 2000s.
Okay.
And it ended up on my last record. I recorded in Nashville and I released it in 2016. So I have two different recordings of this song. One that's very DIY, bedroom recording. I think I had a cold when I did the, vocals. And so I was really sad about the song kind of being flat and pitchy. And when I was deciding what songs to go on my self-titled record that I did with Andrea Tokic over at the bomb shelter in Nashville, this song kind of popped back into my life, and I decided that I wanted to re-record it and at a future point in my life. And if you listen to the song, it's kind of about the time travel of life anyway. So it was kind of this time traveling of life. And then on top of that, you had asked me about songs where I performed piano, and there are so very few of them that I've performed, recorded professionally. Yeah. But this song in particular, it features us playing the piano in a different kind of way. Instead of playing the keys, John Estes, who is the session musician, and we kind of laid down some chords with our hands, right? Like quietly.
Yeah.
And then pressed the pedal, the damper pedal. And when those certain keys were open, we strummed the strings on the inside of the piano with our hands. So it's like we played the strings inside the piano itself like a harp a little bit. So even though I did not play the keys, I played the piano in here as a harp.
This is a very unique way of doing this, so check it out. This is How It Should Be from Ariel Bui. All right, you are tuned to the Piano Men with Stanley Carr, and we're talking with singer-songwriter Ariel Bui tonight about her career in the music business. Ariel, you moved to Nashville in 2011, is that correct?
That is correct.
What made you want to move to Nashville?
You know, it was kind of an accident at first. But after graduating from Rollins, I ended up in Taos, New Mexico, with that liberal arts degree. You know, it wasn't just music. I had been studying about, environmental things and was feeling kind of down about the earth. And I learned about this form of architecture called earthship biotecture. So I ended up in New Mexico for a little while doing off-grid construction and educating people about that. But, and, sustainable living. But there wasn't a whole lot of music there. And I was reminded of this calling to create music. And, I ended up in Nashville kind of roundabout ways. I met this Canadian guy and decided that maybe we should try to elope so I could become Canadian, because in Canada they have great social services for musicians. If you are a musician and you can prove that that's what you do, then they'll, fund your life. Basically, they'll make sure that you're fed and housed and that your projects have funding. And I was like, okay, how do I go to Canada? But that didn't work out. So I lasted 2 weeks in Canada and basically hit rock bottom, because I was like, where do I live now? What do I do? And my dad and stepmom in Texas were like, come stay with us. But in between Toronto in Canada and Dallas in Texas was a friend in Nashville. So my friend Dylan Ethier, he's also a musician. We had collaborated on many of my projects from my Florida days. He helped me with recording a lot of the tracks for my first record, Disguised as Fate. And he ended up moving to Nashville years prior to study sound engineering at SAE. So I went and I on my trip down, I visited Dylan in Nashville, and we ended up recording an EP of songs in his house. We did a whole nother album together, and we did it to tape, and it was really fun. And I met a lot of different musicians, and I hung out in Nashville for a couple weeks, and it felt like a really cool town. I went to Dallas and it was not so cool. I was not getting along with my family, and I asked Dylan if I could come back to Nashville and crash on his couch. And that's what happened. I ended up crashing on his couch. I even have a song all about this. It's called Moon Over Kentucky, and it kind of chronicles my journey from New Mexico essentially to Canada, and that not working out, and going to Kentucky and going to Louisiana. There was a little side trip there. My mom lives in Louisiana, and then ending up in Nashville. So that's kind of what drew me. It was an accident. I was seeking out a place where I could be a musician, but it was an accident that I had ended up in Music City, and I stayed here, and I've been here ever since.
That is just a phenomenal tale. Like, you're going around to different places. And how did you end up in Mexico?
Oh, New Mexico. Yeah, well, I had seen a documentary called The Garbage Warrior about this form of architecture called earthship biotecture. And their headquarters was in Taos, New Mexico. I actually did end up in Mexico before moving to Taos, New Mexico. I did an internship. I did 2 internships building earthships, one in Texas and one in Baja in Mexico, in Todos Santos.
Wow.
And then I was hired. My brother, my partner at the time, and I all had signed up for some internships learning to build hands-on. And then we ended up living off the grid in Taos for a couple years. They stayed out there for a lot longer. And now I'm in the process of building one out there finally. I've had a piece of land out in New Mexico for a long time. And during the pandemic, I was able to pivot my business to being online and started traveling back and forth. So now I'm kind of hoping to split my time between Music City, Nashville, and Taos, New Mexico, which is just really beautiful and inspiring.
And in 2012, you opened your new school, Melodia. What can you tell me about this studio, and what made you decide to start the program?
Well, so Melodia Studio is my music school that I started in 2012, like you mentioned. I mean, When I first got to Nashville, I was wondering, well, how can I make making music sustainable? How can it's hard to work a 40-hour 9 to 5 job and have enough energy at the end of the day to work on your music. And so, um, and I had studied piano pedagogy, at Rollins. I had studied not only how to play, but how to teach and the different ages and stages of development in piano pedagogy, like how to teach different techniques to students of different ages, and then also on top of that, like the business aspects of how to run a studio policy and all of that. So I first got here. I had done like food delivery jobs in college. So I thought to myself, well, maybe I should just like deliver food around Nashville so that I can get to know the city. Well, what I learned very quickly was that driving in Nashville, even then, even 10 years ago, was not enjoyable, and that it's a large city. So if I were to start a music school, if I were to start teaching piano, would I want to teach in students' homes? I mean, you could be teaching one lesson in Brentwood and the next lesson in Madison. I mean, you're wasting a lot of time in rush hour traffic. So I was also babysitting and nannying when I first got here, piecing together lots of part-time jobs so I didn't have to commit to a full-time job, so I would have time to work on music. And I asked this family I was babysitting for if they would introduce me to their piano teacher, and that was Adrienne Wilfong. So Adrienne, I asked her, I said, okay, I notice you go to students' homes to teach. How do you feel about that? And she was not really happy about all of the driving she had to do. I said, well, I was thinking the same thing and thinking of what it would be like to join together with other teachers and have a space. So her sister taught violin. That was Sarah Wilfong. We had other really talented violin teachers, Kristen Weber, and we had Allie Sperry, and she was our vocal teacher and yoga teacher. We had Brenda Zitzman teaching guitar, and so that was our original collective. We started Melodia Studio as a collective of teachers that shared a space at 100 Taylor Street, which is now, that was like the very beginning of 100 Taylor Street being used as, that's in Germantown, being used as like an artist space. So we were like one of the first people in there. And we did that for a little while until it didn't really work for us anymore. Some of the teachers, most of their students were in the neighborhoods they lived in, 12 South, wherever. So we all kind of disbanded, and I moved into a house in Germantown that was a little better suited for my studio. And from there, it was mostly me for a little while, me running Melodia Studio as myself. It was mostly that for a little while, and then I met Amaya Aguirre. She plays keys in this band called Thelma and the Sleaze, so it was me and her for a while. There was Alice Buchanan. She moved to New York, though. She taught violin. And then I feel like it got to a point where I had to move out of my Germantown studio. It got too expensive. I had help from family. I bought a house in North Nashville, and at that point I had about almost 50 students, and it was too much. It was really nice as far as career-wise, but as far as that original intent to have this career that I could have alongside writing my own music and pursuing my own music career, I was starting to get to this point where I said, well, I can't take on any more students. What happens now? And organically, I had a lot of different teachers or teaching artists or musicians come up to me at that time saying, we noticed that you're able to teach and have a music career. How do you do it? And I said, well, I could consult with you for a long time about this, or you could join my studio. I can help with the hardest parts of it, the admin, the studio policy, the, billing and all of that kind of stuff, and organizing recitals. And so now we've got, not only do we have just so many teachers in Nashville now, we also have teachers in New York City. We're expanding to New York as well. And of course, with online lessons, we can offer lessons to students wherever. And we've had students in Canada, in Florida, we have students all over now. It's grown really fast over the last couple of years. It's been hard for me to keep up with, but I think Melodia Studio now has over 10 teachers teaching not just piano, but violin, guitar, voice, bass, drums, you name it. And if there is an instrument that we're not currently offering lessons in, I should mention this on our website too, is that we have a network of musicians that we know. So, we had a student who was like, my daughter's getting into cello now. And I was like, let me ask around. I know musicians and I know music teachers, so let me ask for you. And so, yeah, we're able to provide music lessons to students of all ages for so many different instruments now.
How cool is that to have a school devoted to teaching music, especially here in Music City? It's just amazing how it's grown in the last 10 years.
It is. I especially am so grateful that we were able to continue teaching lessons throughout the pandemic. We pivoted to online as soon as the pandemic hit, and it was really a positive force in a lot of the students' lives. They were pulled out of school. They didn't have as much social interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to continue having one-on-one mentor type of relationships throughout a pandemic, and to not only have like that 30 minutes out of every week where they were learning music, but that it was an activity that they continue practicing throughout the week, that it gave them, a coping mechanism throughout that time. I feel really grateful that we were able to, offer that during such a difficult time.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, the cool thing about having that opportunity in the middle of such a terrible time is that you can have online classes, and now with things kind of looking brighter in the world, you can have lessons from wherever, whenever, and you don't have to leave your house to do it. You can just do it at your own convenience, and I think that saves a lot of money and time doing it that way.
Absolutely, yeah. So now we're able to offer lessons not only like in students' homes, in teachers' studios, home studios, as well as online. I mean, after I loved being able to pivot to online for the fact that I was able to start traveling, and now I feel like, if I'm teaching a few days a week, I can maybe go on tour and then teach. But it was also for the parents became a very convenient thing, because they could be in the other room cooking dinner and not have to be fighting rush hour traffic after school. A lot of families have multiple students, so they're also waiting for a long time for their students, their kids' lessons and things like that. And so a lot of families have opted to continue online with me anyway, even after being able to go back to in-person activities.
Where do you see the school heading in the next 5 to 10 years? What's your ultimate goal for this project?
I think my ultimate goal for this project is to be able to provide lessons to even more students internationally, even, to be able to have an international reach, and to be able to provide teachers as well with a living wage. We did adjust our rates, our tuition recently, because I've noticed that wages for teachers haven't gone up, and unlike a public school teacher, I don't have to go through an entire board in order to do that. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we had scholarships and things for students. We weren't turning anyone down because of the inability to pay. But as things evolved, I was noticing too, I want to take care of my teachers that are part of my studio as well as the students. And they all have degrees and many years of teaching experience. I mean, they're not just glorified babysitters. Not that as a former child care worker, there's anything wrong with babysitting either. But I believe that everybody deserves a fair wage. And so my goal in the next 5 to 10 years is to not only be able to provide lessons to students of all backgrounds, both financial backgrounds as well as like any other part of their background, but that I also want to be able to support teachers who are musicians in being able to make a fair living and a fair wage while sharing their highly developed skills and knowledge with their community. and growing that community, having different locations. Like I said, we've expanded to New York. I really want to grow that. New York is really big. It has lots of neighborhoods. I'm learning about that market, and getting to the place where, we have students everywhere and teachers everywhere.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, that sounds like a pretty big goal to have, and I wish you the best with that. What is next for you? Do you have any upcoming releases or shows you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, I have a new album coming out. It's called Real and Fantasy. The single comes out on Friday. The single is called 16. We were talking about, my days in Florida playing shows and all this stuff. So this album is kind of like the tale of basically anywhere from, my days of starting to play music in the scene when I was 16 all the way to now, kind of a coming of age into my 30s, the adult situations that get in the way of, our dreams and fantasies, but also, like kind of, I wrote most of the songs before the pandemic started. And so also it kind of ends with, like just trying to make it through, trying to make it through another day. But yes, the single comes out on Friday, which is also my birthday. I'll be turning 36. So it'll be,
birthday.
thank you. It'll be the 20th anniversary of me being 16. And then on October 14th, I will be having the album release show at the East Room. I will have a full band. I tried to have everybody who played on the record play at the release show. I got everyone except for the bassist. He had to pick up a tour. But Megan Coleman, she's amazing. She plays drums. She has been playing with Jenny Lewis and Yola and all of these amazing musicians, and she'll be joining me on drums. And then Jack Lawrence from the Dead Weather, he played on the record, but he won't be able to make it. So we're going to have Gabe, who usually plays with Alana Royale. He'll be joining on bass. Joe Shornikov, who, by the way, is an amazing keys player, and you should have her on your show. She's got an album coming out right now. It came out this year, but she is an amazing keys player, and she played keys. And we also had Ellen Angelico on the guitar. So they'll be joining me on stage at the East Room, and we'll have Joe Shornikov is going to be playing her own set as well, and Jessica Brienne and Jack Silverman. So it's going to be a really fun lineup, but that show is 18 and up. And so what I'm kind of telling people who can't make it to that show, I'll be playing a set at Celebrate Nashville in Centennial Park.
Okay.
And that's an all-ages event, Saturday, October 1st. And I'll have a band then, too. They're called the This, That, and the Whatevers. And they'll be joining me on October 1st. And our set is at 1:15 p.m. I don't know which stage we're at, but it's probably the smaller stage. So that'll be an all-ages opportunity to see me play some of these songs live before the album release show on the 14th.
Well, that all seems very exciting, and I'm so happy for you, Ariel. Where can people find you on social media? Do you have a website where people can check out your music?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have a website, arielbui.com. So that's ArielBui.com. But I'm also on all the socials. Basically, I'm on Instagram is the one I'm the most active on. So Instagram at Ariel Bui. But I'm also on Facebook at Ariel Bui Music. I have a TikTok. I haven't posted on it yet. I don't know how to use it. I have a Twitter. I've never really figured out how to use that either. And I'm on all the digital streaming platforms, so you can just find me there. But the one place where you can find all of my music is Bandcamp. So arielbui.bandcamp.com is where you can find all of my albums. Otherwise, just my first and my last record are on like Spotify and all those other places.
Well, Ariel, this has been a wonderful time. Unfortunately, we are out of time tonight, but I just want to say thank you very much for coming on the show. It means a lot to me and to the listeners, and I'd love to have you back on the show again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. We're going to close this show with a very cute rendition of Ariel's cover of the Beyonce song Hold Up. This is the Piano Man with Stanley Carr, and I will see you back here next time.